Well, before, under fatalism, they would simply just have seen that as their plight, and they would have just suffered under it. But now, with this self-determination, they believe that suffering under these taxes isn't their fate, that there is something that we can do about this, and so they revolted against the monarchy which had imposed these taxes. So there you begin to see how a change in worldview can bring about a major change in what happens. Now, here, with the Peasants Revolt, we have yet another element of the modern worldview, and that is a rejection of authority. So in the Peasants' Revolt, it was the peasants rejecting the authority of the monarchy that was imposing the taxes. And this element of the modern worldview is seen vividly a little bit later on. 1776, the American Revolutionary War, with its rejection of the British monarchy. And then a little bit later after that, the French Revolution as well. These are all products of this modern worldview. Now, with these revolutions and these absolute monarchies being done away with, what do we have in their place? Well, we have the advent of a new form of government, democracy, where the individual human being gets to vote, where the individual human being gets to determine their own destiny, self-determination. So we have a new worldview which is very much responsible for Canadian society as we have today. A democratic form of government, stunning technological and scientific advances, the concept of human rights. Human rights didn't exist back in this era. Human rights, the protection of human rights was something that could only develop when you have this valuing of the individual human being. The public school system, again, not something that you have back here, something which developed under the modern worldview, because of course the modern worldview values these individual human beings, sees these individual human beings as having so much capacity. Of course, you have to train these human minds to be able to fulfill their capacity. And so you have this idea of educating everyone. So this new worldview, the modern worldview, has given us a lot, but it hasn't been without a cost. Consider, for example, how this worldview has a reliance on science. What is the logical conclusion to a total reliance on science? Well, science purports to be able to explain all natural phenomena. But know what this means. For example, what did people believe back in this era when they felt the ground shaking? Well, they thought, it's God. It's God shaking the ground. Now science comes along and says, well, actually there are plates in the crust of the earth and sometimes they slip and that causes the ground to shake. So all of a sudden, something which had been attributed to God for all this time, all of a sudden people realize, well, it wasn't God after all. And how about when the sun suddenly blackens in the sky? Another thing that people would have attributed to God, but now scientists come along and say, well, actually, it's simply just the moon passing in front of the sun and forming an eclipse. Something else, which is not the responsibility of God anymore. And when this happens over and over again, and it was during this modern era, when this happens over and over again, more and more things being taken out of the hands of God, God becomes less and less significant as a force in the universe. Now, as the scientists were able to explain more and more of these things, there arose a confidence that everything in the whole universe could be explained. The whole universe was explainable as being governed by a set of laws, the laws of nature. So we have this view then of the universe as a totally closed system. And this closed system is totally governed by the laws of nature. So what about things that don't follow the laws of nature? What about something like a miracle? When God miraculously intervenes into human history. Well, according to this worldview, miracles, by definition, contravene the laws of nature. And since the universe is a closed system, totally governed by the laws of nature, miracles simply cannot happen. And so, what we have then is a total rejection of anything supernatural. In their minds, God gets totally shut out from ever miraculously intervening into human history. Now, of course, the preceding worldview, the pre-modern worldview, had a broad openness to the supernatural. People in that worldview had the belief that God can and has broken into human history. God has violated the laws of nature in raising Jesus from the dead, in inspiring human authors to write the documents that were to become the books of the Bible. But a modern worldview totally rejects all of that. Now, with this type of worldview, is there any room for God at all? Well, as it turned out, yes, there was room for God. There was a belief that God did exist, and there was a belief that God did create the universe, but that's about it. Under a purely modern worldview, that's the extent of God. Creator, and that's it. God was likened to a clockmaker. A clockmaker who makes a clock, winds it up, and then simply just lets it run. That's the way that the modern worldview viewed God, as a clockmaker who was there at creation but hasn't been there ever since. Now, this belief structure is known as Deism. Deism. A belief in God, a belief in a creator God who hasn't done a single thing since. Now that's what we get when we extend reliance on science to its logical conclusions. Now, what happens when we extend reliance on reason to its logical conclusions? Well, if you elevate human reason, if you believe that human reason can figure out anything, well, then there's no place for divine revelation. In fact, with this view of God as a mere clockmaker, never intervening into human history, it only follows that divine revelation has never happened. And if that's true, then the Bible is not divine revelation, but merely human writings. So that's what a pure modern mind would or that's how a pure modern mind would look at the Bible. So you see, this worldview led to the rejection of some central beliefs of traditional Christianity. And this reflects yet another element of this worldview, one that we've already seen before, and that is rejection of authority. Before, we saw rejection of authority of the church, of the monarchy. Now, here, we see a rejection of the authority of the church. Rejection of the church's stance on the Bible as divinely inspired. Now, there's one more element of this pre-modern worldview that's especially important for our purposes, and that is the importance of tradition. Now, we have already seen that this new worldview is all about discovery. It's all about development. However, this preceding worldview, this pre-modern worldview, was all about preservation. It was all about maintaining the truths we already had. It was all about maintaining the traditions. So, in the pre-modern era, you're not thinking develop, improve, because what you've got is as good as it can be. You're thinking maintain the traditions. Be faithful to the traditions. Now, what would a modern worldview have to say about tradition? Well, a modern worldview would say, well, you can't just accept a tradition as true just because it's got this label tradition on it. What if some part of the tradition, established centuries ago, isn't true after all? And the error has been passed on generation to generation simply because no one thought to question it. And anyway, not questioning goes against the modern mind. A mind that is always searching for a better answer, a clearer understanding, a more solid conclusion. Now, another mark of the modern worldview is a rejection of the traditionalism of the pre-modern world as a source of truth. Okay, so there we have portraits of a modern worldview and a pre-modern worldview. Now, before we go on to the third worldview, I would like to give you a different take on the distinction between these two worldviews. Excuse me, I'm just going to have to change up here. I have prepared some clips from the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Now, at one level, it's the story of life in a Jewish village in Tsarist Russia in the early 20th century. At another level, Fiddler on the Roof is a study in the interaction of conflicting worldviews. Specifically, a modern worldview conflicting with a pre-modern worldview. So what we're going to do is go through these few clips and watch for where you see the pre-modern worldview reflected, where you see the modern worldview reflected. Maybe if someone could dim the lights over there. That's
wrong one.
Actually that should be good enough though.
Both. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
Here at the temple, we have traditions for everything. How to sleep, how to eat, how to work, how to wear clothes. For instance, we always keep our heads covered and always wear a little prayer shawl. This shows our constant devotion to God. You may ask, how did this tradition get started? I'll tell you. I don't know.
So there's well, you can leave it out. You can leave it out. There's the nature of tradition. You believe it's true, but you don't even necessarily realize how it became true centuries earlier. And that's what we see in, well, here, Jewish tradition.
Dear God, was that necessary? Did you have to make him lame just before the Sabbath?
So here we have another mark of the pre-modern worldview. This supernaturalism, this idea that God does break into human history and do things, in this case, making this horse lame.
That was nice. It's enough you pick on me. Bless me with 5 daughters, a life of poverty. That's all right. But what have you got against my horse?
So, this idea, life of poverty, that's all right. There you have the reflection of the fatalism of the pre-modern mind.
An edict from the authorities. May the authorities grow like onions with their heads in the ground. Amen. What good will your cursing do? You stand around, you curse and you chatter, and you don't do anything.
So here we have the older generation representing a pre-modern worldview. Now we have Burchik, a member of the younger generation, which represents modernism. And here, just his opening speech, he's talking about, you're not doing anything. How can you complain if you're not doing anything? Because a modernist has self-determination as an element of their worldview, and therefore, if things are going to change, it's going to be people putting their minds to it, determining their fate that are going to do it.
all chatting away into the grave.
Excuse me. You're not from this village.
No.
Where are you from?
Kiev. I was a student in the university there.
So, the university, that is one of the ways in which modernism, the modern worldview grew in Europe. Now, this Jewish village tried to insulate itself from the modern world, as did the Mennonites in the Ukraine as well, try to insulate themselves from what was happening around them, which was the advent of this modern worldview. And here, these people in this village are finding that they're not able to do that so well anymore because the modern worldview has been creeping into the younger generation.
Tell me, is that a place where you learned how not to respect your elders?
That is where I learned there is more to life than talk. You should know what's going on in the outside world.
Careful, my paper. Why should I break my head about the outside world? Let the outside world break its own head. Well done.
He's right. As the good book says, if you spit in the air, it lands in your face.
Nonsense. You can't close your eyes to what's happening in the world.
He's right.
He's right and he's right. They can't both be right.
You know, you're also right.
What's his own topic then?
Yes, just summer. Look at it, it's summer.
Okay, notice what happens here. Here we have a beggar, so not unlike what we might see in downtown Vancouver, a panhandler. Our society basically attaches a stigma toward panhandling, and that's because our society has a modern worldview. A worldview which has self-determination as an element. And so this idea that this person who's panhandling, if they would just get their act together, if they would just make the effort, they could get a job and support themselves. Whereas a pre-modern, what would a pre-modern mind say? A pre-modern mind would say, a beggar like this, well, that's his fated station of life. He was fated to be a beggar. And so it's just simply accepted by everybody in the village. And that's why Tevye even apologizes to him for not giving him the milk without him having to ask for it.
Tevye, the rabbi's order.
Oh, of course. So you're from Kiev, Berchik. Berchik. So you're a newcomer here, huh? As Abraham said, I'm a stranger in a strange land.
Moses said that.
Forgive me. As King David said, I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue.
That was also Moses.
For a man with a slow tongue, he talked a lot.
I have no money, and I'm not a beggar.
Take it.
So there again, you see this self-determination. He is only going to eat if he works and earns the money to be able to do it, because he feels he is capable of doing anything. Whereas Tevye, he is totally outside of that type of mindset.
It's a blessing for me to give.
Very well. For your sake.
You know, it's no crime to be poor.
In this world, it is the rich who are the criminals. Someday their wealth will be ours.
Oh, that would be nice. If they would agree, I would agree.
And who will make this miracle to come to pass?
People, ordinary people.
So there is again this belief in the inherent ability of humans to accomplish anything they set their minds to.
Like you?
Like me.
And until your golden day comes, Repechik, how will you live?
By giving lessons to children. Do you have any children?
I have 5 daughters.
5.
Daughters.
Girls should learn too. Girls are people.
A radical.
I go.
So in that culture, in the pre-modern culture, again, hierarchy, and girls are farther down the hierarchy than boys, and therefore they aren't as valued as much. Where here, Berchik is saying, well, girls are people too, so reflecting the egalitarianism that is a product of the modern worldview.
I'd be willing to teach them. Open their minds to great thought.
Yeah. I'd like them to know the good book.
So Berchik's thinking in terms of great thoughts, opening our minds to great thoughts. That is the development of the human mind. Whereas Tevye says, I'd like them to know the good book. In other words, their traditions.
You are going to be married.
Married? What do you mean?
The wolf has asked for your hand.
I knew it. The butcher? Oh, dear God, I thank thee. I thank thee.
Why do you have to? What do you have to say, son?
What can she say?
Let us say one word.
My firstborn, a bride. Oh. May you grow old with the fortune and honor. Not like Fru Sarah, that first wife of Blazes. She was a bitter woman. Fiddler, may she rest in peace. Not like my cycle. And now I must thank Yenta. My cycle, a bride. A bride! Oh, I thank thee! I thank thee! Oh, a bride!
Well, huh?
Mazel tov, cycle.
Mazel tov, cycle. What kind of a mazel tov is that? And you're a virgin, aren't you going to congratulate her?
Congratulations, Simon, for getting a rich man.
Ah, again with the rich. What's wrong with being rich?
It's no reason to marry. Money's the world's curse.
May the Lord smite me with it. And may I never recover. My cycle knows I mean only her welfare. Am I right, cycle?
Yes, Papa.
There, you see?
I see. I see very well.
Well, my child, why are you so silent? Aren't you happy with this blessing? Huh?
Papa.
What is it? Tell me.
Papa, I don't want to marry him. I can't marry him. I can't.
What do you mean you can't? If I say you will, you will.
Okay, so this battle of wills here. On the one hand, you have a modernist who believes that she can determine her own fate by making decisions that will allow her to do what she wants. On the other hand, you have a pre-modernist stuck in a hierarchical way of thinking where he is higher on the hierarchy than his daughter is, and therefore she should listen to what he says. He has the authority.
If it's a matter of money, I'll do anything. I'll hire myself out as a servant. Just
But we made an agreement. And with us, an agreement is an agreement.
Is that more important than I am, Papa? Papa, don't force me, please! I'll be unhappy all my days! I don't want to marry him.
All right. I won't force you.
Oh, thank you, Papa. Thank you.
Thank you, Papa. Seems it was not ordained that you should have all the comforts of life.
Okay, can I have the lights on, please? So here at the end, Tevye does something which a pre-modernist would never do. He gives in to the pressure of someone who has no business in even suggesting how a decision should be made. And yet he doesn't. Notice how he does it. His words at the end. It was, I guess it was not preordained. In other words, he was misreading what the fate was, and it's the only reason why he was willing to change his mind. So we have this picture of pre-modern merging into modern in this movie. Now, on to the third worldview, and that is postmodernism. Now, postmodernism is very much a reaction against the modern worldview of the preceding era. As we've seen, the modern worldview held up the human mind as capable of solving all the world's problems, of resolving all conflicts. But looking back from the perspective of the late 20th century, it was obvious that the modern worldview was wrong. There was the savagery of 2 world wars and the Holocaust. There was an environment which was being badly damaged. There was runaway poverty and crime, even in industrialized nations. The postmodernists blamed the powers that be of the modern era for this mess, saying to them, "We trusted you to be able to deliver, but you've let us down." And the betrayal that the postmodernists felt resulted in a profound distrust of the powers that be, a profound distrust of the authorities responsible for making those decisions. And this distrust of authorities is a key mark of postmodernism. So, for example, on issues related to morality, postmodernists say, well, we can't trust any authorities to make the right decisions and instruct us of what is moral and what is not moral. We can't trust authorities like parents. We can't trust authorities like the church. And as a result of not being able to trust any authorities, each person is left to decide on their own what is moral and what is immoral. So each person ends up with their own version of the truth. And so, while in the modern era, you could speak in terms of absolute truth when it came to moral issues, now in the postmodern era, you have to speak in terms of relative truth. In other words, truth relative to the particular person. And this is what marks postmodernism. Everyone recognizing, I may not agree with your version of the truth, but it's truth for you, and that's great. Relativism, relativity of the truth. Now we've seen in the postmodern world that each person is making their own decision on what is true. But we haven't addressed the issue of on what basis does a postmodern make the decision on what is true? What is most compelling to a postmodern in the making of that decision? Well, it's not what is most reasonable or what is most logical. Reliance on reason is an element of a modern worldview, and postmodernism was rejecting everything in the modern worldview. Rather, what is most compelling to a postmodern is what feels the most genuine. What feels the most authentic. And so a postmodernist will most likely decide for the version of the truth presented not by the person whose logic is the soundest, not by the person whose evidence is the most compelling. Rather, a postmodern will most likely decide for the version of the truth presented by the person who comes across as the most genuine. And so in the postmodern world, intelligence gets trumped by personality. Now we've seen that what is most compelling to a postmodernist is genuineness, and it needs to be added that what feels genuine will be dictated by one's life experience, by how one's life experience has shaped the person. So here we get another major way in which postmodernism is radically different from the modern worldview. With the modern worldview, the pursuit of truth was an objective venture. Anyone who pursued the truth needed to set aside all personal feelings, beliefs, biases in coming to an objective decision. Kind of like how we expect juries to make objective decisions. But with the postmodern world, the pursuit of truth is recognized as a subjective venture. Postmodernists believe that all of one's personal feelings, beliefs, biases will be influential when determining what is true, simply because it's impossible to set them aside. It's impossible to be totally objective. So, postmodernists openly admit we are being subjective when pursuing the truth. We are bringing an agenda to the pursuit of the truth. An agenda emerging out of our feelings, our beliefs, our biases. So, we have now surveyed the last 1,000 years of Western thought in like 45 minutes. And we've seen three distinct worldviews, very different from one another. And we've begun to see how the different elements of the worldviews has resulted in different approaches to the Bible. What we're going to do now is quickly isolate the single most prominent approach to the Bible from each of these three worldviews that you would likely see in churches today. Okay, we'll start again with the modern worldview. The most prominent approach is likely going to be emerging out of this reliance on reason, this reliance on logic. Like, for example, the modern worldview would say, okay, the Bible was not originally written in English. It was originally written in Greek and Hebrew. And so it's only logical that if we want to get to the intended meaning of a verse, you're going to have to analyze that verse in the original Greek or Hebrew. Likewise, you're going to need to read that verse against the original cultural context, which is very different from our cultural context. A modern worldview would say any given verse is a mere building block of a larger flow of thought. And so you need to read the verse in the context of its surrounding verses. It's only logical. That's a reliance on reason. Now, a postmodernist wouldn't approach a Bible verse in this way. Remember, pre-modern. On to pre-modern. A pre-modernist would not approach a Bible verse in this way. Pre-modernism is characterized by a reliance on tradition, a trust in tradition, a trust that the accurate understanding of a verse was established centuries ago and has been faithfully handed on from generation to generation. That being the case, there's no need for digging into the original Greek or Hebrew. There's no need to look at the original cultural context in search of the correct understanding. They would say, we already have the correct understanding. So a pre-modern would feel confident in quoting a Bible verse and not feeling compelled to explain the meaning of this Greek word or the cultural context of this detail. Simply, quoting the verse is sufficient for its correct meaning was established centuries early and has been passed on in tradition. Now, what about an approach emerging out of a postmodern worldview? We've seen that one of the major marks of postmodernism is subjectivism, openly allowing the meaning of a verse to be influenced by one's feelings, beliefs, and biases. So, while the pre-modern worldview would believe the intended meaning of the verse was established centuries ago and has been passed down in tradition, and the modern worldview would believe that the intended meaning of a verse can only be discerned through serious digging, the postmodern worldview would believe, who cares about the intended meaning of the verse? What is truth for me is how this verse connects with my current feelings, beliefs, and biases. Now, with this as foundation, we are ready to put all of this to use. What I want each one of you to do is to establish your personal biblical interpretation profile. Now, what I want you to do is scan down these 3 columns and discern how much of the way that you interpret the Bible is influenced by the pre-modern worldview, how much by the modern worldview, how much by the postmodern. And do it in terms of percentage. So, 3 numbers. You want to come up with 3 numbers that add up to 100. And you notice at the bottom of your handout, there is a slot at the bottom of each column. So just put your percentage for each column in those slots. Now, just to give you an idea, my profile is 1777-6. 1777-6. I was trained this way. However, being trained this way was not able to squeeze out my belief in the supernatural, my belief that the Bible is the inspired Word of God, that God does and has broken in miraculously into human history, but I would not go with traditionalism or fatalism or a hierarchical view. So only 17% on the basis of supernaturalism. And over on this side, I would say that yes, it is impossible to be totally objective in the study of the scriptures, so that would be the 6% over in that column. And I've actually written my profile on my name tag, 1777-6. So I encourage you just to spend like a minute, just spend a minute. And then if you feel free, maybe we want to do a bit of sharing as to your profiles.